Fleet Commander stood perfectly still before the massive holographic display aboard the Imperial flagship called Dominion's Reach. His four eyes moved slowly across the data streams that flowed like rivers of light through the darkened bridge. For 3,000 cycles, the Empire had maintained absolute control over every corner of the Orion Traverse. They had cataloged every species, documented every vessel, and tracked every piece of debris that drifted through their vast territory. Their databases were considered perfect and complete. No ship moved through space without their knowledge. No species existed without their permission. This was the foundation upon which their empire had been built, and this was the truth that every officer held sacred. Until this moment. Senior Analyst stood at his console with trembling appendages. His usually steady voice cracked as he spoke. "Commander, I am detecting an anomaly at the outer border of Sector 7. A vessel has crossed into our space." Did not turn from the display. Vessels crossed into space every day. Trading ships and diplomatic envoys and scientific expeditions all moved through their territory under strict Imperial supervision. "Identify it," he said with the boredom of routine. "That is the problem, Commander. I cannot identify it." Now turned. In his 200 years of service, he had never heard those words spoken aboard a vessel. "Explain." Pulled up the sensor data and projected it onto the main display. A small blip moved across the star map with smooth and deliberate precision. The vessel registers as human in origin based on its general configuration and energy signatures. However, there is no matching entry in any Imperial database, no manufacturing code, no transponder frequency, no registered point of origin. According to our records, this ship does not exist. "That is impossible," said flatly. "We have cataloged every human shipyard in existence, every colony, every military installation, every civilian transport they have ever constructed. Run the scan again." "I have run it 17 times, Commander. The result is the same each time. This vessel appears in none of our records. It carries no identification signals. It responds to no hailing frequencies. It simply moves through our space as if we are not here." Stepped closer to the display and studied the trajectory of the unknown vessel. It moved with an elegance that seemed wrong somehow, too smooth, too confident. "What is its speed?" Hesitated before answering. "The vessel is traveling at speeds that exceed anything in our records for human technology. Our fastest interceptors would require weeks to match its current velocity. At its present course, it will cross 3 sectors of Imperial space before any of our patrol fleets could hope to intercept." The bridge fell silent. Officers exchanged glances that carried the weight of confusion and the first cold touch of fear. They had built their empire on certainty. They knew everything about everyone. Their power came not just from their weapons but from their absolute confidence in their own knowledge. And now a single vessel was making that knowledge look incomplete. "Dispatch the 5th Patrol Squadron," ordered. "I want that ship stopped and boarded. I want to know who they are and where they came from and how they built something we have never seen." "Yes, Commander." Watch the blip continue its journey across his display. He had spent his entire career dealing with humans. They were a familiar species to the Empire, stubborn and emotional but ultimately predictable. They had their colonies and their territories and their carefully measured military forces. They had studied them extensively and found them to be of moderate concern but no real threat to Imperial interests. Treaties had been signed. Boundaries had been drawn. The humans knew their place. So who was aboard this vessel that seemed to belong to no one? Far across the void of space, the unknown vessel continued its journey with calm indifference to the chaos it was causing. The ship was sleek and angular with lines that suggested both beauty and purpose. It carried no name on its hull and flew no flag from any nation. Inside its bridge, the lights were dim and the atmosphere was quiet. The crew of 30 moved about their duties with the relaxed efficiency of people who had been doing this for a very long time. Captain Daniel sat in the command chair and watched the tactical display that showed the patrol ships now scrambling to intercept them. He was a man in his middle years with gray touching his temples and calm brown eyes that had seen more than most. He did not seem worried about the 17 warships now racing toward his position. He did not seem worried about anything at all. Lieutenant stood beside him with her arms crossed and a slight smile on her face. She was younger than her captain but carried herself with the same quiet confidence. "They have dispatched an interception fleet," she reported. 17 vessels. They seem upset." Daniel allowed himself a small smile in return. "They always do." "Should we increase speed?" "Not yet. Let them get close enough to get a good scan. I want them to see exactly what they are dealing with. Then we run." Nodded and returned to her station. She understood the plan. They all understood the plan. They had spent years preparing for this moment. Every calculation had been checked and rechecked. Every variable had been accounted for. This was not a random incursion into enemy territory. This was the opening move in a very long game. In the engine room below the bridge, Chief Engineer Peters monitored the power levels of their drive core. The technology that hummed within those chambers was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It was unlike anything most humans had ever encountered. It had taken decades to understand and even longer to master. But now it was theirs, and it gave them capabilities that the galaxy had never seen. They believed they knew everything about humanity. They had studied human ships and human weapons and human politics. They had calculated exactly how much of a threat humanity posed, and they had found the answer acceptable. Humans were contained. Humans were managed. Humans were no longer a concern. They had made a terrible mistake. Daniel looked out at the stars through the forward viewport. Somewhere out there, 16 human colony worlds suffered under rule. Millions of people who had been abandoned by treaties and forgotten by there. People who had been told that rescue would never come. They were wrong. "Navigation," Daniel said quietly. "Set course for the hollow expanse. We have a message to deliver." The unknown vessel turned gracefully and accelerated into the darkness between stars. Behind it, 17 warships pushed their engines to maximum power in a desperate attempt to catch something they did not understand. They would not succeed. This was only the beginning. Admiral of the High Council had not risen from her meditation chambers in 6 cycles. She was old even by standards, with scales that had faded to pale gray and eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless empires across the galaxy. She had earned her rest. She had earned her peace. But peace was no longer possible because something impossible had happened, and the Empire needed answers. She stood now before 17 sector commanders in the Great Hall of the High Council. The chamber was vast and ancient, with pillars that stretched toward a ceiling lost in shadow. Light filtered down from crystal formations that had been growing for. This was the heart of power, and in all its long history it had never felt so uncertain. "Explain to me," said in a voice that carried the weight of centuries, "how a single human vessel penetrated 47 light-years of Imperial space without a single successful intercept." Commander stood before her with his head bowed in shame. He had commanded the pursuit personally, and he had failed completely. "The vessel's acceleration capabilities exceed anything in our records, Admiral. When we attempted direct pursuit, it simply outran our fastest ships. When we attempted to establish a perimeter and box it in, it changed course at angles that should have destroyed any crew inside from the forces involved." "Should have," repeated slowly, "but did not." "No, Admiral, it did not. The crew appeared completely unaffected by maneuvers that would have killed any known species. Whatever technology powers that vessel, it is beyond our current understanding." The commanders shifted uncomfortably. These were words that were never spoken in space. The Empire understood everything. The Empire knew everything. That was the foundation of their civilization. To admit ignorance was to admit weakness, and weakness was something they could not afford. turned to face the great window that looked out over the imperial capital. Cities stretched to the horizon in every direction. Billions of lived their lives in absolute confidence that their empire would protect them. That confidence was built on knowledge, and now their knowledge had proven incomplete. "Where is the vessel now?" she asked. "It has disappeared into the hollow expanse, Admiral, a region we abandoned centuries ago due to unstable stellar activity. Our sensors cannot penetrate the interference." "So they are hiding." "It would appear so." Was silent for a long moment. She had lived through wars and plagues and political upheavals. She had seen species rise to challenge the empire, and she had watched them fall. But this was something different. This was not an army or a fleet. This was a single ship crewed by perhaps a few dozen humans, and somehow that single ship had done what no enemy had accomplished in 3,000 cycles. It had made the empire feel afraid. Far across the galaxy in the dead space of the hollow expanse, the unknown vessel drifted among the debris of ancient stars. The region was harsh and unwelcoming, with radiation storms and gravitational anomalies that would tear most ships apart. But this ship was not like most ships, and its crew had learned long ago how to survive in places where survival should have been impossible. Captain Daniel sat in the common room with his crew gathered around a holographic table. The faces that looked back at him were tired but determined. They had been preparing for this mission for years. Some of them had been preparing their entire lives. Chief Engineer Peters spread a star map across the table and pointed to the positions of fleet movements. "We got their attention. They have repositioned nearly 40% of their border patrols trying to figure out where we went. The outer territories are more exposed than they have been in decades." Navigation Officer Blake studied the data with careful eyes. "They are scared. They are making decisions based on fear rather than strategy. That is exactly what we wanted." Daniel nodded slowly. "Fear is a tool. Used correctly, it opens doors that force could never breach. They have built their entire civilization on the belief that they know everything. We just proved them wrong. Now they have to wonder what else they do not know." Leaned forward with her hands flat on the table. "The question is what we do next. We cannot hide here forever. Eventually they will find us, or we will run out of supplies." "We are not going to hide," Daniel said. "We are going to do exactly what we came here to do." "How long until the broadcast system is ready?" 6 hours, maybe less if can finish calibrating the encryption bypass." Communications Officer Shaw looked up from his console in the corner of the room. He was the youngest member of the crew, but his skills with technology were unmatched. "I can have it ready in 4. The communication networks are sophisticated, but they have a weakness. They never expected anyone to attack them from the inside." Daniel smiled. It was a rare expression on his weathered face. "Then we attack from the inside." The crew dispersed to their stations, and Daniel remained alone in the common room. He walked to the viewport and looked out at the swirling chaos of the hollow expanse. Somewhere beyond that chaos were 16 human colony worlds. Millions of people who had been born into slavery and told that freedom was a dream their ancestors had foolishly believed in. They had been abandoned by Earth and forgotten by the galaxy. But Daniel had not forgotten. None of them had forgotten. 30 years ago, the first humans had begun to disappear. Not killed or captured, but simply gone. Ships that vanished from their routes. Scientists who walked away from their laboratories. Soldiers who refused to accept the treaties that had traded human lives for peace. They found each other in the darkness between stars. They built what they needed. They waited. They believed they had cataloged every human capability. They had studied Earth's military forces and found them manageable. They had analyzed human technology and found it inferior. They had calculated the threat level posed by humanity and concluded that humans were not worth worrying about. They had never considered the humans who chose to stop being counted. Daniel thought about the colony worlds. He thought about the generations of humans who had lived and died under rule. never knowing that someone was coming for them. He thought about the message they were about to send, and what it would mean to people who had forgotten what hope felt like. "We have not forgotten you. Be ready." 4 hours later, Shaw activated the broadcast system. The signal cut through encryption like a blade through water. It bypassed firewalls and security protocols that had been considered unbreakable. It appeared on screens in labor camps and processing facilities and underground shelters across 16 worlds simultaneously. A simple message in plain text that would change everything. On the bridge, Daniel watched the transmission spread across space. Behind him, his crew stood in silence. They had thrown the first stone. Now they would wait to see what happened when the ripples reached the shore. The Empire had no idea what was coming, and by the time they understood, it would already be too late. The message appeared without warning on every screen across 16 worlds. It cut through Imperial security systems that had been designed by the greatest minds in space. It bypassed encryption protocols that were supposed to be unbreakable. It spread through colonial networks faster than any technician could track or stop. "We have not forgotten you. Be ready." 7 words that carried the weight of generations. On the colony world of 7, a woman named Grant stood in the darkness of Processing Station 12 and read those words on a cracked display screen. She was 34 years old and she had never seen Earth. She had never seen any world beyond the gray metal walls and toxic atmosphere of 7. Her mother had been born here and her grandmother before that. For as long as anyone could remember, her family had worked the processing lines and breathed the poisoned air and died before their time. Had been taught since childhood that this was the natural order of things. There were the masters and humans were the workers. There was no rescue coming because there was no one left who cared. Earth had signed treaties and drawn boundaries and forgotten about the millions of humans left on the wrong side of those lines. Hope was a dangerous thing, because hope led to resistance and resistance led to punishment. But now stood before those 7 words and felt something stir inside her that she had never felt before. Someone remembered. Someone was coming. Around her, the other workers of Processing Station 12 gathered in small groups and stared at the screens. Some of them wept. Some of them laughed. Some of them simply stood in silence and let the meaning of the message sink into their souls. For the first time in generations, humans on 7 dared to imagine a different future. Overseer received the report within minutes. He was an administrator of middle rank with little patience for irregularities. "Shut down all communications immediately," he ordered. "I want every screen in this sector disabled. Find the source of this transmission and destroy it." His technicians scrambled to obey, but it was already too late. The message had spread to every corner of the colony. It had reached the mining pits and the refinery towers and the underground warrens where humans lived their brief and difficult lives. It had planted a seed that could not be unplanted. On the Imperial, Admiral received the reports with growing alarm. The transmission had appeared on all 16 human colony worlds simultaneously. The coordination required for such an attack was beyond anything the Empire had believed humans capable of, and the content of the message was perhaps more dangerous than any weapon. "They are giving the colonists hope," said one of her advisors. "This could destabilize the entire labor infrastructure." Understood the danger all too well. The Empire depended on human labor. 16 colony worlds produced raw materials and manufactured goods that fed the Imperial economy. The system worked because the humans believed they had no choice. They worked because resistance was futile and rescue was impossible. But if they began to believe that rescue might actually come, everything could change. "Increase security on all colony worlds," ordered. "Double the garrison forces, triple the surveillance networks. I want every human monitored at all times, and find that ship, find it and destroy it." But finding the ship was proving to be impossible. The unknown vessel had emerged from the hollow expanse and was now moving through Imperial space with the same impossible speed it had demonstrated before. It appeared on sensors and then vanished. It changed course at angles that physics. It was there and then it was gone, and the pursuit fleets were always 3 steps behind. On board the vessel, Daniel studied the reports coming in from the colony worlds. The message had been received. The first phase was complete, but there was still much work to be done. Brought him a cup of coffee and sat down beside him. Real coffee was a luxury they rarely enjoyed, but this seemed like an appropriate occasion. The resistance cells are active on 14 of the 16 worlds, she reported. The other 2 are isolated, but we expect contact within the next few days. Daniel took a sip of the coffee and let the warmth spread through him. How are they responding? Exactly as we predicted. They are pulling ships from the outer territories to reinforce the colonies. Their border patrols are at minimum strength. The outer sectors are more vulnerable than they have been in centuries. Good, that will matter later. For now, we focus on the colonies. Blake called from the navigation station. Captain, I am detecting a battle group on intercept course. 12 heavy cruisers. They will reach weapons range in approximately 4 hours. Daniel did not seem concerned. Adjust course to heading 773. Take us through the nebula. The nebula is highly unstable. Radiation levels would be lethal to most vessels. Most vessels, Daniel agreed, not ours. The ship banked smoothly and accelerated toward the glowing clouds of the nebula. Behind them, the battle group hesitated at the edge of the radiation zone. Their commanders knew that following into the nebula would be suicide. They watched helplessly as the unknown vessel disappeared into the deadly light. On 7, Grant gathered a small group of trusted workers in the maintenance tunnels beneath Processing Station 12. These tunnels were old and largely forgotten by the overseers. They were the perfect place for secrets. The message was real, said quietly. Someone out there remembers us. Someone is fighting for us, but we cannot simply wait for rescue. We have to be ready to help ourselves. An old man named Brooks shook his head slowly. He had seen too many failed hopes in his long life. They will crush us if we try anything. They have weapons and soldiers and ships. We have nothing. We have numbers, replied. We have knowledge of systems they depend on, and we have something they will never understand. We have each other. She looked around at the faces gathered in the dim light of the tunnels. These were people who had worked beside her for years, people who had shared her suffering and her small joys, people who had been taught that they were powerless, but who had never stopped dreaming of something more. When the signal comes, we act together. Every station, every camp, every tunnel, all at once. Not violence because violence gives them an excuse, just refusal. We stop working. We stop cooperating. We show them that their empire runs on our labor and our labor is no longer free. Looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. I have waited my whole life for something worth believing in. Maybe this is it. Smiled. It was a rare expression in the processing stations of 7. It is. I promise you it is. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Somewhere out there, an unknown vessel carried 30 humans through the heart of an empire. And on 16 worlds, millions more began to remember what their ancestors had known. Humanity was not meant to be slaves, and one way or another they would be free. The hunt for the unknown vessel became the largest military operation in history. Admiral mobilized 200 warships from every corner of the empire. 40 sensor arrays were repositioned to create an overlapping detection grid that covered 3 entire sectors. Scout vessels patrolled the borders of known space, while battle groups waited at strategic points ready to respond to any sighting. The Imperial Navy had never committed such resources to finding a single target. And still the humans slipped through. The vessel appeared on sensors near the system and vanished before pursuit ships could react. It was detected crossing the void of echoes and disappeared into a radiation storm that should have torn it apart. It emerged near the colony world of 3, just long enough to broadcast another message, before accelerating away at speeds that left interceptors helpless in its wake. Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched another failed intercept play out on his tactical display. His officers moved quietly around him, afraid to speak. The shame of repeated failure hung over them like a physical weight. "They are playing with us," said quietly. "They appear exactly where they want to appear. They let us see them just long enough to prove we cannot catch them. Then they vanish again." "Perhaps they are running low on fuel or supplies," suggested his tactical officer hopefully. "They cannot keep this up forever." Shook his head. "They have been doing this for 3 weeks. If they were low on resources, they would be conserving energy, not performing impossible maneuvers at every opportunity. No, they are sending a message. Every time we fail to catch them, they prove that our power is not absolute." On the colony worlds, that message was being received loud and clear. The humans who worked the mines and factories and processing plants had spent their lives being told that they were all-powerful. They had been taught that resistance was impossible because the Empire could see everything and stop anything. But now they watched as a single human ship made the entire Imperial Navy look foolish. If the Empire could not catch one vessel, perhaps the Empire was not as powerful as it claimed. Daniel understood the psychology of oppression. He had studied it for years during the long preparation for this mission. People who have been enslaved do not simply rise up because someone tells them to. They have been conditioned to believe in their own helplessness. That conditioning must be broken slowly and carefully. It must be replaced with evidence that resistance is possible. Every time the unknown vessel escaped a trap, it provided that evidence. Every failure proved that the masters were not invincible, and with each proof, the seeds of rebellion grew stronger. On board the ship, the crew worked in careful rotations to keep the vessel moving through enemy space. They were tired. They had been tired for weeks, but they were also proud. They were doing something that had never been done before. Brought reports to Daniel in the small hours of the night cycle. 14 colony worlds have confirmed active resistance cells. They are organizing in secret, preparing for the signal. On 7, a woman named Grant has united 3 major processing stations under a single command structure. Daniel nodded slowly. "I have read about her. She is remarkable, born into slavery, but she never accepted it. Her grandmother was part of the original colonial resistance decades ago before they crushed it." "To think they eliminated all resistance," observed. "They were wrong. They were wrong about many things. That is what happens when you believe your own propaganda. You stop looking for threats because you have convinced yourself that no threats exist." Peters emerged from the engine room with grease on his hands and exhaustion in his eyes. "Drive core is holding steady, but we are pushing it hard. They are adapting their intercept patterns. They are getting better at predicting our movements." "How much longer can we keep this up?" "At this pace, maybe another week. After that, we will need to find somewhere safe to do maintenance." Daniel considered the timeline. 1 more week of running, 1 more week of proving the impossible. It would have to be enough. Start calculating the final approach vector. We are going to need to be in position in 6 days. Raised an eyebrow. "The final approach? You mean we are actually going through with the endgame?" "That was always the plan." "I know. I just did not expect to live long enough to see it." Daniel put a hand on the engineer's shoulder. "None of us expected to live this long, but here we are, and we are not going to waste it." On 7, Grant received the latest intelligence from her network of informants. They had tripled security across all processing stations. Surveillance drones patrolled every corridor. Armed guards stood at every exit. The overseers were afraid, and afraid people made mistakes. She met with her fellow organizers in the deepest tunnels beneath the colony. 12 representatives from 12 different stations, each one risking their life simply by being there. "The signal will come within the week," told them. "When it does, we move. Every station stops working at the same moment. Every human refuses to cooperate. Not violence, not sabotage, just refusal. A young man named Pierce spoke up. He was responsible for organizing the mining operations on the eastern continent. They will respond with force. They will make examples of us. They might, agreed. But consider what happens if we do nothing. We continue to work ourselves to death in their factories. Our children inherit our chains. Nothing ever changes. Is that really better than taking a risk? Was silent for a moment, then he shook his head. No, it is not. The message said they have not forgotten us. Someone is fighting for us out there. The least we can do is be ready to fight for ourselves. Brooks, the old man who had seen so much disappointment in his life, spoke quietly from his corner of the tunnel. I never thought I would live to see this day. I spent my whole life believing that hope was a lie told to make us work harder. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe hope is the only thing that makes us human. Reached out and took his weathered hand. Hope is exactly what makes us human, and soon the whole galaxy is going to see what happens when humans remember how to hope. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Somewhere among those stars, an unknown vessel prepared for its final journey. And across 16 worlds, millions of humans waited for a signal that would change everything. The Empire was about to learn that it had made a terrible mistake. It had counted the ships and the weapons and the soldiers. It had calculated the threat posed by humanity and found it manageable. It had forgotten to count the souls. The unknown vessel emerged from hyperspace within visual range of the. It appeared without warning in the most heavily defended space in the entire galaxy, surrounded by orbital defense platforms and battle stations, and the combined might of the Imperial home fleet. It should have been impossible. The planetary defense grid was the most sophisticated system ever created. Nothing could approach the undetected. And yet there it was, hanging in the void like a quiet challenge to everything they believed about themselves. Admiral stood in the great chamber of the High Council and watched 200 weapon systems lock onto the intruder. Around her, officers shouted orders and technicians scrambled at their consoles. The entire defense network was focused on a single small vessel that had somehow appeared in their midst. "They have come to die," said, and her voice carried across the chaos of the chamber. "After all this running, after making fools of us across half the galaxy, they have come to throw away their lives in some pointless gesture of defiance." "Shall we fire, Admiral?" asked her weapons commander. Hesitated. Something about this felt wrong. The humans had proven themselves too clever and too capable to simply sacrifice themselves without reason. There had to be something more to this. There was always something more. Before she could give the order, every screen in the chamber flickered and went dark. Then a human face appeared, calm and weathered, looking out at the assembled leadership with eyes that held no fear. "Admiral," said Daniel, "we have not come to die, we have come to deliver a message." Stepped forward until she stood directly before the massive display. "You are in no position to deliver anything but your surrender. You are surrounded by enough firepower to destroy a small moon. One word from me and your vessel becomes vapor." "Perhaps," Daniel agreed. "But before you give that word, you may want to check your colonial networks." A cold feeling spread through his chest. She gestured sharply, and her technicians pulled up the feeds from the 16 human colony worlds. What she saw took her breath away. On 7, Grant led 3,000 workers out of Processing Station 12. They walked in silence through corridors that had been their prison for generations. Guards shouted orders that went ignored. Surveillance drones recorded everything, but the workers did not care. They simply walked. Across the planet, the same scene repeated at every processing station and mining facility and factory complex. Humans stopped working. Humans left their posts. Humans refused to obey. On 3, Pierce coordinated the shutdown of the primary mining operations. 12 billion credits in ore extraction. the foundation of 3 imperial trade routes, ground to a halt because the workers simply stopped. On Prime, humans emerged from the underground warrens where they had spent their lives and stood in the open air for the first time. They looked up at the sky, and they did not go back inside. Across 16 worlds, the same story unfolded. Not violence, not sabotage, just refusal, humans standing still, humans saying no. "Your empire runs on human labor," Daniel said quietly from the screen. "Your economy depends on our compliance. For 3,000 cycles, you have counted on our fear and our isolation and our belief that no one was coming to help." He leaned forward slightly, and his calm eyes seemed to look directly at. Someone came. The chamber fell silent. The commanders and advisors and technicians all stared at the colonial feeds, watching their carefully constructed system collapse in real time. They had built their economy on the assumption that human workers would always work. They had never considered what would happen if the workers simply stopped. "This is a bluff," said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You cannot maintain this. We will send troops. We will crush these uprisings and restore order." "You could try," Daniel agreed. "But consider the cost. 16 worlds in revolt, your economy in chaos, trade routes disrupted, production halted, and while you are dealing with all of that, you still have us. A ship you cannot catch, carrying technology you cannot understand, built by people you never knew existed." Stared at him. "What do you want?" "Freedom for the colony worlds. Full citizenship and self-governance for all humans under rule. In exchange, we share what we have learned. The drive technology that lets us move faster than anything you have ever built. The communication systems that let us speak through your own networks. Everything we developed in 30 years of exile. You expect us to simply release 16 worlds on the word of 30 humans in a single ship." Daniel smiled, and it was not a cruel smile, but the smile of someone who had been waiting a very long time for this moment. "No, Admiral. I expect you to release them because 30 humans in a single ship just prove that you have no idea what we are capable of. You cataloged our technology and you counted our weapons and you calculated the threat we posed. You found us manageable. You were wrong." He paused and let the words hang in the air. "And this ship is only the first." The transmission ended, stood in silence before the darkened screen, surrounded by her advisors who had no advice to give. For 3,000 cycles, the Empire had believed it knew everything. Today it had learned how much it did not know. On the colonial feeds, the humans continued their quiet revolution. Millions of people standing in defiance. Generations of conditioning broken in a single moment. The empire that had seemed so permanent and so powerful now looked fragile and uncertain. "Admiral," said one of her commanders, "what do we do?" Looked at the feeds for a long moment. She thought about the unknown vessel and its impossible technology. She thought about 30 years of vanished humans and what else they might have built in the darkness between stars. She thought about the price of trying to crush 16 worlds while that vessel remained free to inspire more resistance. "We negotiate," she said finally. "We negotiate and we learn from this. We learn that we never truly understood humanity at all." In the void outside, the unknown vessel turned slowly and began to move away. The weapons platforms tracked it, but no order to fire ever came. The ship accelerated smoothly, and then it was gone, vanishing into hyperspace as easily as it had arrived. On the bridge let out a long breath. "We actually did it." Daniel nodded slowly. "We did the hard part. Now comes the harder part. Negotiations, compromises, building something that lasts." But they agreed. They actually agreed. They agreed because they were afraid. Fear is a useful tool, but it is not a foundation. We will have to give them reasons to keep their word beyond just being afraid of what happens if they do not. He stood and walked to the observation port, looking out at the stars that streamed past as they traveled through hyperspace. "But for today, we celebrate. Today we prove that a few people who refuse to give up can change the fate of millions. Today we showed the galaxy what humans are capable of when they decide to stop being counted and start being heard. On 7, Grant stood in the open air and looked up at the sky for the first time in her life. The atmosphere was still toxic and the sky was still gray, but somehow it looked beautiful. Around her, thousands of humans stood together, breathing the same poisoned air, sharing the same impossible hope. Someone had remembered them, someone had come, and nothing would ever be the same. In the spaces between stars, other ships stirred. Other crews awakened from their long waiting. Other plans set into motion. The unknown vessel had been the first, but it would not be the last. 30 years of building and planning and hopping had produced more than one miracle. The Empire had been put on edge by a single vessel. They had not yet seen what humanity could do when it decided to come home.